Hello, and welcome to the Wednesday class. Today is lesson 11 from the book of Judges. It's also chapter 11. We're actually going to back up a little bit to verse 17 and get the last two verses of chapter 10, and then we'll move on to chapter 11, the continued story of Jephthah. But before we do that, let us open with some prayer. Most gracious and loving God, in all things you watch over us, and you lead us, and you guide us, if we listen, if we pay attention. So today, as we study your word, as we look through our scripture today, help us find the wisdom to carry on. Help us to find what we need to find in our scripture, and help us to apply that to our lives so that we live a better life, that we live a life more in tune with your desire for us as humanity as a whole. Watch over us, watch over your creation, and help us in all things to be listeners to you and to your word for us. Amen. Beginning with verse 17, we'll read verses 17 and 18 out of chapter 10. Then the Ammonites were called to arms, and they encamped at Gilead. And the Israelites came together, and they encamped at Mizpah. The commanders of the people of Gilead said to one another, "Who will begin the fight against the Ammonites? He shall be head over all the inhabitants of Gilead." So as our story begins today, or as our lesson begins today, we see that the Ammonites have moved back into the area, and they have camped in Gilead, which is where again, Gilead is right there at the valley of Jezreel, the central part of Israel. And again, there's going to be a fight for the control of this central area of Israel. The Israelites, they camp at Mizpah. Mizpah, of course, as you probably know from several stories out of Genesis, is Mizpah means outlook. It's used in Genesis. It's used as a statement of here is a place that overlooks you and me as we separate. This is a place that watches over both of us. A Mizpah coin is that coin that has the statement out of Genesis about watching between us as we're apart. It's a military thing. It was done by military wives mostly, but it's a heart-shaped little coin that's broken in half, and it's a zigzag little kind of thing. And if you put the two together, you can read the whole statement. But as it's apart, you can only read half of it. And each one, the military member and the wife back home, would each wear one of these halves of the Mizpah coin. The soldiers, the people that are there encamped at Mizpah, they look to one another and they say, "Who will begin the fight against the Ammonites?" As I mentioned in the last lesson, in lesson 10, this idea of who will lead us, each time before this, the answer comes from God as to who. They're actually asking God, who will lead us in this fight? And the answer in the previous two that I remember where this question was asked, it might have been asked more than that, but at the moment I can only remember two instances of this. The answer was Judah will lead us into the next battle. But here they don't ask God, they ask themselves, who shall be head over all the inhabitants? Who shall be the head of the people here in Gilead? Which in effect really means who will be the head of the of the tribes? Who will be the chieftain? The word they use here is the head over us. And that kind of means chieftain. It's not the Hebrew word shofet, it is the Hebrew word rosh, and it literally means head. But what it figuratively means is not just the mayor of the city or the governor of the area or the territory, but it really means the military head. It's not only the judicial and the administrative head, but it's also the military head. And so whoever it is that they select to lead them into this war, they're going to call their new chieftain, their new head, their new commander-in-chief, if you will. Okay, moving on now to one of the other things before we move on to chapter 11 and the rest of the story. You need to remember here also that there is no prophet's anointing here. There is no prophet's anointing. Each other time, if you go back to Deborah was the prophet who anointed the actual leader. And before that, there was a prophet who showed up and anointed the leader. And each time there's one of these major figurehead leaders, or chieftains, or warrior commanders, they were anointed with oil. They had been anointed. They've been made into a Messiah, if you will. But that means anointed. And so there were all the previous incidents of these major judges has been an anointing by a prophet. And I want you to note here that Jephthah is not anointed as we move forward with the story. So now, moving on to chapter 11. Now, Jephthah the Gileadite, the son of a prostitute, was a mighty warrior. Gilead was the father of Jephthah. Gilead's wife also bore him sons, and when his wife's sons grew up, they drove Jephthah away, saying to him, "You shall not inherit anything in our father's house, for you are the son of another woman." Then Jephthah fled from his brothers and lived in the land of Tob. Outlaws collected around Jephthah and went raiding with him. So, we get kind of the backstory of Jephthah as we moved into this. Now we get the backstory about Jephthah. We find out that Jephthah is the son of a prostitute, not Gilead's wife, but a prostitute. And as he grew up into a strong character, a mighty warrior is how it's worded. And we're also find out here that Gilead was the father of Jephthah. So up to this point here, as you see in the story, we start off with he's the son of a prostitute. That takes precedence at the moment in his life over who his father was, because who his mother was determines where the rest of his life leads. And so as Jephthah's story begins here, as we're getting the backstory on him, we find out first that he is the son of a prostitute, and second, that Gilead was his father. And again, more important than Gilead being his father is the fact that he was a mighty warrior. And so the fact that he's a prostitute, or that he's the son of a prostitute, is the number one thing that we need to know. The number two things we need to know is that he was a mighty warrior. And the number three thing we need to know is that Gilead was his father. Well, Gilead also had a wife, as we know, and she also bore him children, sons. And as those sons grew up, realizing that under the law, although his status is lowered because he is from an illegitimate source, he's the son of a prostitute. According to Sumerian law of the Lipit Ishtar, if Gilead was to not have any other sons by his wife, but he does have sons by a prostitute, those sons from the prostitute are allowed to inherit his estate. And it's very possible that a very similar law is being applied here, is that we need to remember that the Israelites are not following God. They're not following God's laws. They're not following Adonai's desire for them. And that's the whole problem here. You note here when they call up, who will lead us? They're not asking God, they're asking each other. And so again, the people have drifted away from being followers of God's law. And so it's very possible here that they're following law of the region around them instead of Hebraic law, or the Jewish law. this kind of well, it's interesting. We go back and you look at Abimelech, the story of Abimelech. He was the son of a concubine, which is different than a prostitute. You have three levels here of legitimacy and inheritance rights. You have the children of a wife. They have the highest standard. You have the children of a concubine. Now they're a rung below that. And then you have children of a prostitute, or a lot of times you see in the Bible the word harlot is used, but it's a prostitute. And they're on the lowest rung of this ladder. Well, I guess there would be even one lower than that, and that would be the illegitimate child of somebody else's, from somebody else's wife. That would have been David's child with Bathsheba, how she was married to somebody else. And so that child ended up dying, but that would have been pretty low on the rung as far as legitimacy. The difficulty is that on that particular case is this was the son of a king, and so all rules might have been just thrown out. But here, anyway, back to our story here, is that Jephthah possibly could inherit, and so because he was the firstborn, he's the eldest of all of them, even though he's from a prostitute. And so the other brothers would look at him as a threat. And so as they grow up, they realize this guy here could inherit everything. And maybe because he was a mighty warrior, that their father Gilead actually kind of preferred him. But the other brothers, they drive him out. And he flees from them, and he goes and lives in the land of Tob. Excuse me, I moved from the screen because kitten came along and was scratching my leg. So Jephthah, he flees from his brothers, and he heads off, and he goes to the land of Tob. Tob country is located in the northeast of Gilead, and it's in the border district. It's on a border district, and so unscrupulous people, or people who have problems, lawbreakers, people who've been banished, people of low character, they end up going to these border districts because they're kind of like, in early American history of the Western domination of the continent, the period of time that we called the Western period, the expansion as it moves into territories. And territories or areas become territories, there's still a lawlessness about them. We see that in we see that in a lot of our westerns. There was a lot of lawlessness on the borders of these, and we see this in the world today. It's still a thing that happens in the world today in some continents, in some areas of the world, where the border areas are really always kind of lawless areas. Well, Jephthah goes to this Tob, this area there, the land of Tob, this region, and he hires on and he collects around him other exiled and people of low character. And so he starts gathering those forces or those people around him. Now I want you to recognize this is not an unusual thing, and I think I mentioned it also in a lesson not that long ago. This is again would remind us of David and David's when he fled from Saul. Saul was out trying to hunt him down, and David moved off into exile. He collected around him a group of mercenaries, people that he hired on or who just started following him, and they would receive portions of whatever booty he collected as David conquered other territories, claiming to the Philistines that he was attacking Jewish towns, or Hebrew towns, but in reality he was attacking other Canaanite tribes and towns in the area. But David also raised an army just like this: outlaws, brigands, people who were on the edge of society. And so Jephthah collects around him a group of these people also, and they go out on raids, and they start collecting, they get a reputation, basically. Okay, so moving on. Verse 4. After a time, the Ammonites made war against Israel. And when the Ammonites made war against Israel, the elders of Gilead went to bring Jephthah from the land of Tob. They said to Jephthah, "Come and be our commander, so that we may fight with the Ammonites." But Jephthah said to the elders of Gilead, "Are you not the very ones who rejected me and drove me out of my father's house? So why do you come to me now, when you are in trouble?" The elders of Gilead said to Jephthah, "Nevertheless, we have now turned back to you, so that you may go with us and fight with the Ammonites, and become head over us, over all the inhabitants of Gilead." Jephthah said to the elders of Gilead, "If you bring me home again to fight with the Ammonites, and the Lord gives them over to me, I will be your head." And the elders of Gilead said to Jephthah, "The Lord will be witness between us. We will surely do as you say." So Jephthah went with the elders of Gilead, and the people made him head and commander over them. And Jephthah spoke all his words before the Lord at Mizpah. So, the war begins, and they start attacking, and the Ammonites start attacking the people in and around the area there. They make war against Israel. So the elders of Gilead. Now, we need to recognize, if you go back to the story of Gilead, you find out the elders of Gilead are Gilead's other sons. Plus there are others, but a bulk of the leadership of the town of Gilead, or the region of the territory of Gilead, would have been Gilead's sons. And so the elders of Gilead come to Jephthah, his brothers, along with some of the other town folk, the leaders of the town. They come to him and they tell him to be the commander, or they ask him to be the commander, so that they can go off and fight the Ammonites. Again, his reputation has probably gotten to them, the fact that he is a warrior, and a good warrior at that. He's a mighty warrior. And so they ask him to come and be the commander and to fight against the Ammonites. But Jephthah, he wants a little assurances here. And he also wants to kind of rub their noses in what they've done to him. And so his response first off is, "Aren't you the same people who came to me and drove me out of my own father's house? Aren't you the people who did that? So why are you coming to me now?" And their answer is, of course, "Well, we're here now. Nevertheless, we have now turned back to you so that you can go with us, so that you can lead us and fight the Ammonites with us, and become head over us, be the boss over all of us, over all the inhabitants of the whole territory of Gilead." The whole Gilead is now a region that includes the Jezreel Valley and Mizpah and this whole central region of Israelite territory, or is what they're claiming is Israelite territory. And so he said, "We'll make you our chief, our head chieftain, our commander-in-chief. Not only will you be the administrative head, but you'll also be the commander, the judge. You'll be everything. You'll be our leader." Well, Gilead has, and this is what's kind of interesting, is that God is brought into this. Adonai is brought into the story. "If you bring me home again to fight the Ammonites, and the Lord gives them over to me, I will be your head." So, although Jephthah does not, at this moment here, he doesn't call on the Lord, he does invoke the Lord's name and says that if Adonai gives them victory, then he will be the head. Well, if he doesn't give him victory, then he won't be the head. He'll probably be dead. His head will be at an Ammonite, in some Ammonite camp. So they offer him, well, we're here now, and we will give you the whole thing. We'll give you it all. And Jephthah agrees that if God allows it, then we'll make that happen. Then he again calls on, then the elders of Gilead, his brothers and those leaders there, they then also respond with a call to Adonai, that Adonai will be the witness in all of this. And we will do whatever you tell us to do, Jephthah, in this. And again, they also invoke God. So God is not completely out of their lives, but it is not their primary motivation, which is what God actually is desiring, is that God is their motivation. Adonai is their motivation, not a peripheral object of it. So Jephthah goes with the elders, and they make him the commander, the commander-in-chief over all of the forces there, and over all of their villages and their towns and everything. And Jephthah then speaks this promise, this covenant between the people of Gilead and Jephthah. He speaks that covenant, again invoking Adonai into the covenant relationship at this tower of watching. Remember Mizpah, where it watches over you and I. Again, he has chosen a very particular spot that works very well with the situation. Picking up now with verse 12. Then Jephthah sent messengers to the king of the Ammonites and said, "What is there between you and me, that you have come to me to fight against my land?" The king of the Ammonites answered the messengers of Jephthah, "Because Israel, on coming from Egypt, took away my land from the Arnon to the Jabbok and to the Jordan. Now therefore restore it peaceably." Once again Jephthah sent messengers to the king of the Ammonites and said to him, "Thus says Jephthah, Israel did not take away the land of Moab or the land of the Ammonites. But when they came up from Egypt, Israel went through the wilderness to the Red Sea and came to Kadesh. Israel then sent messengers to the king of Edom, saying, 'Let us pass through your land.' But the king of Edom would not listen. They also sent to the king of Moab, but he would not listen. So Israel remained at Kadesh. Then they journeyed through the wilderness, went around the land of Edom and the land of Moab, arrived on the east side of the land of Moab, and camped on the other side of the Arnon. They did not enter the territory of Moab, for the Arnon was the boundary of Moab. Israel then sent messengers to King Sihon of the Amorites, king of Heshbon. And Israel said to him, "Let us pass through your land to our country." But Sihon did not trust Israel to pass through his territory. So Sihon gathered all his people together and encamped at Jahaz, and fought with Israel. Then the Lord, the God of Israel, gave Sihon and all his people into the hand of Israel, and they defeated them. So Israel occupied all the land of the Amorites, who inhabited that country. They occupied all the territory of the Amorites, from the Arnon to the Jabbok, and from the wilderness to the Jordan. So now, the Lord, the God of Israel, has conquered the Amorites for the benefit of his people Israel. Do you intend to take their place? Should you not possess what the god Shemos gives you to possess? And should we not be the ones to possess everything that the Lord our God has conquered for our benefit? Now are you any better than King Balak, son of Zippor of Moab? Did he ever enter into conflict with Israel, or did he ever go to war with them? Israel lived in Heshbon and its villages, and in Aroer and its villages, and in all the towns there along the Arnon 300 years. Why did you not recover them within that time? It is not I who have sinned against you, but you are the one who does me wrong by making war on me. Let the Lord, who is judge, decide today for the Israelites or for the Ammonites." But the king of the Ammonites did not heed the message that Jephthah sent him. So as we begin this section of the story, Jephthah is really trying to prevent war at the beginning here by negotiation. Asking the Ammonites, what is motivating you? Why are you here? Why have you come? And their argument, their claim for this is because Israel took this particular section of land away for them, and that at some time that it actually belongs to the Ammonites, which is interesting because the territory that's under dispute never once belonged to Ammon. But it belonged to King Sihon of the Amorites, not the Ammonites, but the Amorites, a different people. And Israel waged war against him because Sihon raised an army against them. They asked very politely, just like they had in Moab, just like they had already done in Edom, and at the land of Moab, when they got to the edge of the land of Moab. In both of these places, Moab and Edom, they had asked permission to go through the territory and were denied. But they were just denied, and so they skirted around it without any issue. They just bypassed that territory. But when they came to the Amorite territory and King Sihon didn't just let it go. Instead, Sihon brought an army against them. He didn't just say, "No, you can't come through my territory to go on to yours." He actually brought an army because he didn't trust them. He didn't trust them not only to not pass through, but he didn't trust them to even go around. He believed that they were there to take the land. He goes on to ask him, well, why? This happened 300 years ago. This happened way back when. Why are you bringing it up now? And it wasn't even your territory. It belonged to the Amorites, not the Ammonites. It didn't belong to Moab. It didn't belong to Edom. It didn't belong to the Ammonites. It belonged to the Amorites. So why aren't you just kind of, living into what your God, Shamash, has given to you? Now, it is interesting is that Shamash is not really the god of the Amorites. Shamash was the god of the Moabites, not the Amorites. And so that's kind of an interesting little kind of oddity in the story. But it's an oddity in the story, but only in the sense that Jephthah is reminding the king of the king of the Amorites or the Ammonites that Shamash, who is god of the Moabites, didn't seem to have a problem with their possessing this land. In fact, Shamash, why are you bothering us? Why don't you go bother God? God Shamash. You should be paying attention to what your God has given you, or the God of the Moabites have given you. And again, they have that idea that the God of this place is the God of this place, but not necessarily the God of this other place. And each one of these different groups of different peoples had their own gods. You've got Baal, you've got Shamash, you've got Molech, and each one of these is from a different people. So the Ammonites are claiming territory that was never theirs from a god who was not theirs. And so it's just Jephthah is really just kind of bringing that all into focus here, is that this is not just a war about territory. It's also a war about control and a war about gods. and whose God is more powerful. And here Jephthah is again reminding them that a particular God has given you a particular territory, and our God, Adonai, our God, has given us this territory. And are you better than our God in this? And he goes on to ask, are you better than King Balak, the son of Zippor of Moab? Are you even better than him? Of anybody who would have had territorial claims to this territory, it would have been the Moabites, and yet they didn't come and try to take this back. In fact, we've had this now, we've owned this territory now for over 300 years. Why are you just now, after all of this time, coming back to take this territory back? I don't think this is it. Basically, I'm giving you an opportunity to turn around, because this isn't yours. Our God has given it to us. We've owned this now for 300 years. We're not going to give it back. And so, we're going to leave this up to the gods. It's kind of like the ending line here. Who is judge today? Let the Lord, who is judge, decide today whether this territory is going to be the territory of the Ammonites or the Israelites. What Jephthah is claiming here also is that Adonai, his God, is in control of this territory, nobody else. Picking up now with verse 29. Then the Spirit of the Lord came upon Jephthah, and he passed through Gilead and Manasseh. He passed on to Mizpah of Gilead, and from Mizpah of Gilead he passed on to the Ammonites. And Jephthah made a vow to the Lord and said, if you will give the Ammonites into my hand, then whoever comes out of the doors of my house to meet me, when I return victorious from the Ammonites, shall be the Lord's, to be offered up by me as a burnt offering. So Jephthah crossed over to the Ammonites to fight against them, and the Lord gave them into his hand. He inflicted a massive defeat on them from Aroer to the neighborhood of Minnith, 20 towns, and as far as Abel Keramim. So the Ammonites were subdued before the people of Israel. So before going out to battle, Jephthah makes a vow. But what we see first is that the Spirit of Adonai comes upon Jephthah. So although he is not anointed by a prophet, the Spirit of God does enter into him. It does come on him. So he is blessed by that Spirit of God. The same as in the prior major judges. Ones that had to do major work like this, the Spirit of God seems to work, it moved into them, it moved on them. And he passes through Gilead and on into Manasseh. He's going toward where the Ammonites have camped. And then he goes on to Mizpah of Gilead. Then from Mizpah of Gilead he goes on to contact with the Ammonites. But along the way he makes this vow to Adonai, and here is the crux of the problem that we'll come to. If you will give the Ammonites into my hand, then whoever comes out of the door of my house to meet me, when I return victorious from the Ammonites, shall be the Lord's, to be offered up by me as a burnt offering. I'm going to go back to the word whoever. This word could be interpreted also as whatever. So it could be that Jephthah was saying that whatever comes out, maybe it's, it was not unusual for people to keep their livestock in in a portion of their house for warmth during part of the year and things like that. And so it was not uncommon for that. And so he could have been anticipating that somehow a sheep or a goat or something else would come out of the door. But the word whoever is actually more prevalent in the use of the word here. Whoever is the more common answer for that word, or meaning of that word is whoever. Well, this is where the problem is going to be. But we'll talk about that as this story moves forward here. So he makes this promise that whoever comes out or whatever comes out of his door when he comes back, he will turn into a sacrifice, offer up as a burnt offering to God. So as the story moves forward, he crosses over into where the Ammonites are, and he goes and fights against them. And Adonai gives the battle into his hands, and he does a massive defeat on them, all the way from Aroer to Manith, 20 towns as far as Abel Karim. I guess what you need to know about that is that it's in the northeasterly direction, and a lot of the places there that are mentioned aren't even, they're not sure where they come from. But he's moving north, pushing them more north. One of the things we need to see here is that Jephthah, although he is the victorious here, and God's Spirit seems to have settled on him, or came upon him, and he seems victorious here, he is a marginal person. He's kind of in between a positive God direction and a negative toward how he responds to God. He kind of is in the kind of a limbo in between the two, which is just kind of both in his birth and how he came into the world through that's a negative. He's a marginal person there, both in his ancestry and in any future progeny from him. But he's also a marginal person in relationship with God. Although he calls on God, he makes promises to God, it is the oath itself that turns out to be the serious problem. Verse 34. Then Jephthah came to his home at Mizpah, and there was his daughter coming out to meet him with timbrels and with dancing. She was his only child. He had no son or daughter except her. When he saw her, he tore his clothes and said, "Alas, my daughter, you have brought me very low. You have become the cause of great trouble to me. For I have opened my mouth to the Lord and cannot take back my vow." She said to him, "My father, if you have opened your mouth to the Lord, do to me according to what has gone out of your mouth, now that the Lord has given you vengeance against your enemies, the Ammonites." And she said to her father, "Let this thing be done for me. Grant me 2 months, so that I may go and wander on the mountain and bewail my virginity, my companions and I." "Go," he said, and sent her away for 2 months. So she departed, she and her companions, and bewailed her virginity on the mountains. At the end of 2 months, she returned to her father, who did with her according to the vow he had made. She had never slept with a man, so there arose an Israelite custom, that for 4 days every year the daughters of Israel would go out to lament the daughter of Jephthah the Gileadite. Well, as our story continues, we see the problem. Jephthah's daughter, his only child, comes out the door first. Now, why he didn't anticipate this, maybe he did, we don't know, but why he didn't anticipate this is a normal thing. For the women, as the men come into the village, the women would come out of their homes with joy. They would be coming out with tambourines and with musical instruments, and they would be singing and dancing and praising the victorious warriors coming home, loving on their family. This is what they would be doing. That Jephthah didn't see that as a possibility just is astounding. One of the other things that really bothers me about this is that he kind of blames her. He's the one who made this stupid vow. He opened his mouth. Just so you know, Jephthah means opening. And so Jephthah here, in opening his mouth, has stated something absolutely stupid. Just absolutely stupid. That he would sacrifice the first, whoever came out of his house first. He should have known that it would have been his daughter who does this. Well, he blames her. Isn't that how this works a lot? Is that the predator blames the victim, or even sometimes society blames the victim. You know what I'm talking about. We've seen that sort of thing happen in our own culture. It happens frequently in our own culture, in our own time, and that's what happens. Is he's blamed the victim in this, but he can't take the vow back. And what we see in the daughter is, wow, much more honor than the father, much more honor than Jephthah. In this. She agrees that, you made this vow to God, you can't go back on that. Vows during this time were taken very seriously, and if you vow toward God, that's an obligation you can't nullify that. You can't go back on that. Only God can, once you have made a vow to God, only God can reverse that vow and take that vow away from you or allow you out of that vow. So, we see that Jephthah's daughter, in her as honorably as she is, does not run away. She doesn't attempt to go, to run off. What she does ask for is an opportunity to go and mourn the fact that she will never have any children, the fact that she will die a virgin, the fact that she'll never be able to, to have a life. Gives her opportunity for 2 months to go and maybe just kind of sow some wild oats for 2 months or to whatever. But she goes off into the mountains with some friends, and for 2 months they, I guess they mourn her loss. And then she returns, and he does according to the vow. It doesn't tell us exactly how that all takes place. It doesn't go into the gory details, and I'm thankful for that. But what it does do is it does say that he actually did carry it out. And what also is interesting too is that it doesn't explicitly say that, and that left room for a lot of commentators and a lot of theologians and a lot of rabbis and teachers of the Hebrew text, a way of kind of saying, well, maybe the sacrifice that he made her do was that she was a perpetual virgin. He locked her away so that she would never have any children and would die a virgin, a childless virgin. But he didn't actually put her on an altar and sacrifice her. But I want you to know that there's the other horror to the story, and here is the horror in the story, is that God does not, as we saw way back in Abraham's time with Isaac, God no longer calls for human sacrifice. The gods that the Israelites are surrounding themselves, the god of the Canaanites, they still call for human sacrifice. Molech and Chemosh and these other gods all call for human sacrifice still. But Adonai does not call for human sacrifice anymore. The last time our God, Adonai, called for a human sacrifice was Isaac. And then God stepped in and intervened in that and didn't allow the human sacrifice to continue. And that was the end of human sacrifice according to our understanding. Now, I know that if they were to go back and look at some archaeological evidence of things, that there were still places where human sacrifice happened. Here is an example of that, where human sacrifice did happen. But the horror about it is, the horrible thing about this whole bit is that God, Adonai, our God, did not call for human sacrifice. This was something that the man did, Jephthah did, but it's more in conforming with other gods. And so my thought is that God, our God, Adonai, would have been greatly distressed by this, would have been really troubled by this, and would probably have not really, if the, basically what I'm saying is that Jephthah did not make a sacrifice to Adonai. Maybe in his own mind he did, but in reality, in Adonai's mind, he did not. Jephthah made a sacrifice to a god that Adonai is not. This particular story also does have an etiological conclusion. That is that it provides a future celebration with a reason for being. The 4 days where the daughters of Israel go out to lament the daughters of Jephthah, or the daughter of Jephthah. And so there is to sing dirges for 4 days, to sing, to mourn the loss for 4 days, is this etiological conclusion of this particular story, which I find very interesting all by itself. Okay, so that is the end of our Jephthah story and the end of our lesson today. Next week we will do chapter 12. We'll pick up there. The Jephthah story continues for just a brief period of time, and then we will look at 2 or 3. I don't know. I'll have to look forward. There's either 2 or 3 judge. I think there are 2 judges that we'll finish up the story of Jephthah and hit 2 judges, I believe, in chapter 12. I'd have to go look it up to be sure, but I believe that's right from my memory, which I no longer trust completely. Anyway, well, thank you for coming. I hope you enjoyed the class. Those of you who received notification of this class by email, if you've made it all the way to the end of the class today, you'll hear this part of the announcement, and I'll know. Those of you who make it this far, if you would email me, those of you who get this by email, if you will email me, if I started having a live class, an outdoor class at Newman United Methodist Church in Grants Pass, in their courtyard, how many of you would attend comfortably? And again, I also would be able to offer, although there is no parking lot right there in that area, it is within the distance of that I can broadcast on an FM channel. That's part of the equipment I got today. So if you would be interested in attending that, we could also video it, live video it. I've got a couple of thoughts and ideas on that, on live video streaming it to like YouTube or to Facebook. I would prefer YouTube myself because I have more control over what happens to it. We could even broadcast it as a live program online where you could comment, and I would have somebody that would be assigned to looking over those comments, and if there were questions, valid questions, or questions that would make it through whoever my editor would be, you could even participate in the class that way. It's a possibility. I'm thinking about that. But again, I need to find out what your response would be, what kind of attendance I would have. And so if you're interested in that, please email me at the email address that you received the notification about this. If you see this on Facebook, if you happen to get through this to Facebook, or if you get to this through Facebook, and you know my email address, go ahead and email me. But if you have an opinion or you have thoughts on this, please let me know. I'm interested in this. And so that ends our class for today. God bless and keep you in all that you do. Go in peace to love and serve the Lord. And all God's people said, Amen.